Reconstruction was a time period of 1865 to 1877. That was the time when the states from the Confederacy were controlled by the federal government before being readmitted into the Union. There were two forms of Reconstruction that took place. There were Presidential and Radical Reconstruction. Presidential Reconstruction took place from 1865 to 1867. Once Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson was a Democrat. He believed in having a strong state government. He also believed strongly in laissez-faire. This stated that the federal government should stay out of the economic and social affairs of its people. Johnson wanted to restore the Union as quickly as possible. Johnson's plan became known as Presidential Reconstruction. He returned confiscated property to white Southerners, pardoned hundreds of former Confederate officers and government officials. He undermined the Freedmen's Bureau. He did this by ordering it to return all confiscated lands to white landowners. Johnson also appointed governors to supervise the drafting of new state constitutions and agreed to readmit each state provided it ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Congress wasn't happy with Johnson's presidential plan, so Congress challenged by establishing the Joint Committee of Reconstruction. In 1866, Congress voted to renew the charter that had created the Freedmen's Bureau. Johnson did veto the renewed Freedmen's Bureau. Congress did try again to preserve the Bureau, and they succeeded. The Bureau was terminated in 1872. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This act gave citizenship to all Americans, no matter the race. This act did not apply to Native Americans, though. Not long after the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the 14th Amendment was passed. The Radical Republicans were not happy with the Civil Rights Act and 14th Amendment. There were mobs and riots in the South. Johnson blamed the Radical Republicans, and during his famous swing around the circle, Johnson went around the country and berated Republican, pro-war Democrats, and blacks. In 1867, Radical Reconstruction started. Congress passed the First and Second Reconstruction Acts. They also passed the Tenure of Office Act. Andrew Johnson was impeached by the House of Representatives in 1868. The Radical Republicans had control of Congress after the 1866 election. This gave them the power to override any vetoes from President Johnson. Congress passed the First Reconstruction Act. This made the secession states to just a little higher than conquered territory. They were divided into 5 military districts. Each district was governed by a Union general. This helped protect the former Southern slaves, but the states had to ratify the 14th Amendment and provide suffrage for African Americans if the states wanted to be readmitted into the Union. The Reconstruction Act was passed. Second Reconstruction Act was passed as well. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This act gives citizenship to all Americans, no matter the race. This act did not apply to Native Americans, though. Not long after the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the 14th Amendment was passed. The Radical Republicans were not happy with the Civil Rights Act and 14th Amendment. There were mobs and riots in the South. Johnson blamed the Radical Republicans during his famous swing around the circle. Johnson went around the country and berated Republicans, pro-war Democrats, and blacks. In 1867, Radical Reconstruction started. Congress passed the First and Second Reconstruction Acts. They also passed the Tenure of Office Act. Andrew Johnson was impeached by the House of Representatives in 1868. The Radical Republicans had control of Congress after the 1866 election. This gave them the power to override any vetoes from President Johnson. Congress passed the First Reconstruction Act. This made the secession states to just a little higher than conquered territory. They were divided into 5 military districts. Each district was governed by a Union general. This helped protect the former slaves. Southern states had to ratify the 14th Amendment and provide suffrage for African Americans if the states wanted to be readmitted into the Union. The Second Reconstruction Act was passed as well. This put Union troops in charge of voter restriction. There was also the Tenure of Office Act. This helped to protect prominent Republicans in Johnson's administration by forbidding their removal without congressional consent. Johnson was impeached for blocking too many military reconstruction bills. They claimed he violated the Tenure of Office Act. Congress passed the 15th Amendment in 1869. This gave African Americans the right to vote. In 1870, 3/4 of the Union had ratified the amendment, and because of this, it became a law. Southern states had to change the government to fit with blacks and whites being free. They had their aspirations, achievements, and failures. They wanted for blacks and whites to live together in peace, and while doing that, they hoped they could rebuild the state's government economy. During all this, people had different views. President Johnson wanted to be lenient to the South. The Republicans wanted to punish the South. African Americans were hoping the government would redistribute them land so they could also have a bright future. There were achievements and failures that followed this. The Republicans were more the winners because the Union was preserved. Some of the other achievements were the passing of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment. The 14th Amendment gave all African Americans the right to become citizens. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. And other races had the right to vote, but not Native Americans. Slaves were given land by Union General William T. Sherman in 1865. This was known as 40 acres and a mule. Public education became more prominent. Post-Civil War, especially for blacks. Before the Civil War, North Carolina was the only Southern state to have an established comprehensive system of education, but it was only for the whites. After the Civil War, the other Southern states followed. They also created schools for blacks. Blacks were also being elected into public office. Not everything was good for the blacks, though. The Ku Klux Klan was terrifying blacks. Black codes were also created to restrict blacks of their rights. This also limited their rights of economic and educational opportunities. Racism crippled the state governments from all they wanted to accomplish. Blacks played a role in politics, education, and the economy during Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the time and era when blacks could do these things in society. Hiram Revels was the first African American to serve in Congress. He was from Mississippi. He served from 1870 to 1871. Many African Americans served in state and local governments during Reconstruction. There were 14 African Americans who served in the House of Representatives between 1869 and 1877. 6 of those men were lieutenant governors, and more than 600 served in Southern state legislatures. However, when Reconstruction ended in 1877, whites took the seats in the government that African Americans had held. The Reconstruction era was really the first time when blacks had the right to an education, especially in the South. After the Civil War ended, many African Americans were eager to get an education. Blacks were still looked at as inferior to whites, and this came to light through the economy. Whites had first bids on any farmland. The land that blacks got through 40 acres and a mule was confiscated through President Johnson. Blacks were then given more farmland through the Southern Homestead Act, but that land was mostly swampy territory. They also did not have the resources to farm, such as seeds, plows, tools, and horses. They had to resort to sharecropping. African American businessmen were discriminated against, too. During and following the Depression of 1873, the North was more worried about their financial issues than helping former slaves get their rights to freedom. The North also stopped worrying about groups such as the Ku Klux Klan and their antics. Because of this, the Democrats took control in the House of Representatives and Reconstruction was stalled. The Democrats were taking more and more control of the South as the 1870s wore on. Because of the Depression of 1873 and the Ku Klux Klan, many Unionists, carpetbaggers, and scalawags all left the South by the mid-1870s. In 1876, the Supreme Court ruled in the United States versus Cruikshank that only states and not the federal government could prosecute individuals under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. Because of this ruling, many Ku Klux Klan crimes went unpunished. There was a presidential election in 1876. The Democrats were ready to take the White House, and they nominated Samuel J. Tilden. The Republicans did not renominate Ulysses S. Grant, and instead nominated Ohio Governor Rutherford B. Hayes. In the election, Tilden received 184 electoral votes of the 185 needed to win the White House, and Hayes received 165 votes. Hayes also lost the popular vote by about 250,000 votes, but confusing ballots in South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida made the results questionable. Under normal circumstances, the votes would have been recounted in front of Congress by the President of the Senate. The only problem was the President of the Senate was a Republican and the Speaker of the House was a Democrat. Neither could be trusted. Congress passed the Electoral Count Act in 1877. This was going to establish a special committee to recount the votes fairly. There were 15 men from the House, Senate, and Supreme Court on the committee. Hayes had won by one vote according to the committee. Democrats struck a bargain with the opposition to achieve their political goals. The result to all this was the Compromise of 1877. The Democrats agreed to let Hayes become president in exchange for a withdrawal of federal troops from the South. After the Compromise of 1877, Reconstruction was over.